was a dark and stormy night, nor'easter rolling in. It's a long 12 hours, the power's out again. I pray for inner strength and that we don't lose no lives. Just another day in the first responders' eyes. Half a cup of coffee's gone, the first run comes in. A car slid off the road, there's a family trapped within. My heart beats like a hammer, I can barely catch my breath. I'm thinking the worst and hoping for the best. Yeah, we ain't superheroes, we're just ordinary people trying to make a difference, and the first on every scene. It's a heavy, heavy burden to carry all this hurting when you can't unsee the things you've seen. It keeps going on when those sirens are gone.
Welcome to another Making a Difference Wednesday here on the award-winning Mad Radio Show. We are in the Fishbowl here in Globe Park, the entertainment capital of Arlington, Texas. And with me, I have Sam back. Thank you for coming back, Sam. I missed you.
I am here.
Closer.
Yes,
There you go.
We had a great spring break, despite what was going on. Enjoyed the hill country. No cases out there.
Nice.
Still, and yeah, it was very peaceful. Very
Excellent.
relaxing.
You needed that mental break.
I did. It was a
Needed that mental
little
break.
frazzled though with everything coming in. It was a good thing we didn't have a good Wi-Fi connection. So,
Well, you know, once again, the Mad Radio Show is dedicated to all our first responders who are out there on the front lines every day, especially now, making a difference in everybody's life, no matter where it's city, town, state, community, wherever you work, man. God bless you all for doing what you do every single day. You know, and we pray as a family here in Fishbowl. We pray as first responders, as mental health professionals, as civilians, man. We pray for your safety. We pray for your health, and we thank you from the bottom of our hearts to be out there and trying to help. As with other jobs that you do have to do, you know, this is just one more burden that's on your backs. And to the nurses and doctors that are fighting lack of equipment and are doing 16 and 20-hour tours in the hospital to accommodate these patients, God bless you as well. So, Sam, why don't you tell us who we got coming on today?
hey, today we have a different kind of hero, but every bit of a hero in my book, and I know your book,
Yes,
John.
always.
Please welcome from A Brighter Tomorrow, Mckenna Kline.
Welcome, welcome.
Happy to be here again.
Yes, welcome. Welcome back.
Welcome
actually.
back.
We're
Yes,
gonna
always
talk
a pleasure to
about
have
some exciting
Mckenna on.
things. And from Fishbowl's very own award-winning mental speak show, LaTonya Davison.
Hi.
LaTonya.
Hey.
You know, LaTonya, I'm always a big fan of you. I'm always a big fan of your show. You bring things into such a different perspective, and you really make you think. You know, every time you speak, man, you know, your show shows it. Mental speak, every time you speak, you make someone think about another perspective in life and you really look at something from a different angle. So I love you for that.
Thank you.
And
Thank you for having me.
You're amazing with that. So, Mckenna, thank you for coming in today. And, you know, tell us a little about Brighter Tomorrows and what your goals are and what your upcoming events are.
So Brighter Tomorrows is a nonprofit that's operated out of Irving. We serve domestic violence and sexual violence victims all over North Texas. We have 2 full-service shelters. We also do legal aid, counseling, and then I do outreach and prevention. I'm on the education team, and so we're out in the community and schools. I'm mostly at universities, but we have programs that go all the way down to early childhood education. And so we're out in the community doing those types of programming. Currently, we have had to put all of those in the community programs on hold due to the outbreak concerns. Being that we do have the 2 shelters, we have to be really careful because we have so many people in such close proximity.
How are they handling that? I mean, I didn't even think about shelters, and excuse me for not, but it was not something I really thought about. How are they doing that?
So it's actually really difficult because we had to shut down all volunteers. We can't let anybody in and out of the office, and because we do have so many people in such close proximity, we're having to limit 2 people in the office at a time. We do have essentially 3 different facilities that we're operating at all times. We have the 2 shelters that are in private locations, and then we also have our office, which is normally accessible for people to do walk-in appointments, case management, crisis counseling, anything like that. At the moment, we have shut down our office as far as walk-ins. We are still operating 2 24-hour crisis lines, so we have three operators that pick that up at any given time. And those people are also taking care of the shelters right now because we're limiting exposure. And so that's been difficult. We're also having difficulties because normally we have great other organizations, churches, and local community members that set up for frequent donations. And due to everything being on short supply right now, we're not getting those donations in. So we're actually really cutting it close in our food pantry. And if y'all are hearing this and are interested in donating anything, that being said, you can also do deliveries. Like you can get an Amazon delivery of food, Amazon Fresh, to our office, and we can put it in our food pantry. You can favor food to us, anything like that, groceries. And then we can also do online donations if you're interested in doing that on our website, which is www.brightertomorrows.net. We can post the address on there as well in the comments. That way, if y'all are interested in sending any fresh supplies, we need food for our food pantry. We also are especially in need of paper goods, toiletries, paper towels, toilet paper, obviously, cleaning supplies, bleach, hand sanitizer, all of those things that y'all are probably looking for too. We're trying to supply for dozens of families. So if y'all are able to help in any way, we would greatly appreciate that.
Sorry. I just wanted to touch on just one thing you just said about, we got to think about our non-for-profits. I know we got to think about ourselves, but the VROC is feeling that same pain with their food pantry. So this is a ripple effect across our country. I'm sure every non-for-profit's feeling this. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, saying good.
No, I was going to say, what kind of safeguards have you put in for the folks that are utilizing the shelter because they, depend on you all?
Right. So we, as soon as this started spreading, we were really on top of it from the very beginning as far as making sure that number one, we don't allow visitors to our shelters just for their safety in general. But we have volunteers that are background checked that come in. We immediately stopped letting people come in and out of the shelters we do things like, basic repairs, painting, trim jobs, something like that. We're not doing any of those things right now. We're really limiting people coming in and out. We are no longer doing in-person counseling sessions. All of our sessions are going through Zoom meetings, and so we're switching everything to online format. We do have those people that are stationed that are at the shelter facilities, and we have a couple of people that are rotating out of each shelter so that we're limiting as much exposure as possible. And then we're asking the people that are in contact with our shelters to self-quarantine when they're not at work.
And can people, if they want to drop off food, they can drop off food to the location, like leave it outside?
Yes, you can absolutely leave the food outside of our office, which is in Irving. You're absolutely welcome to do that. We will definitely need volunteers when we're ready to get going again. But for right now, that's as much proximity to the clients as we can have.
Got it.
Now, for those who are either first-time listeners or do not know Mckenna, without going too deep, can you? I find that you are such a strong woman for what you've done and what you've accomplished and where you're bringing our next segment into. Mm-hmm. Can you give us a little background on what brought you here today? Like, what brought you to the Brighter Tomorrows? What brought you into this?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of years ago, going on 2 years in August, I experienced a sexual assault in Dallas. And I found that after that, I had a really difficult time finding places and resources where I could get counseling, legal advice, things of that nature. And I was pretty lost in the process. And being in what we call the trauma brain, I wasn't able to think and process those things for myself properly and didn't really have a lot of help in doing that. And so once I got to a place where I figured out those things after about half a year of struggle and started getting in counseling and taking care of myself, I wanted to spread that information with other people that were also having difficulty connecting to those resources. And so I started doing something just on my own called Trauma Talks, where I was hopping on and sharing information via video on social media. on what trauma is, how it gets processed in the brain, how you can help with people that are survivors of trauma, what PTSD is, a lot of the things that y'all talk about here.
Yeah.
And from that grew into me starting my own initiative called Project Save. And with Project Save, what I was doing was combining all of the resources in the area and consolidating it into one place and making workshops that I was bringing out into the community where people could have a panel of experts that were talking about giving legal advice and counseling advice, coping skills, and just basic introduction to trauma so that people could have access to all that at one time and bring it to a place that they're already at. So we did that at the library here in Arlington, which was my first time coming on the show.
That's right.
And it's grown from there, and now I'm doing community education with Brighter Tomorrows.
That's amazing. And LaTonya, a little background on you and why you're so important for this conversation is you deal with children every single day that may have experienced what Mckenna's experienced, but are afraid to come out and get that strength. We really want to learn how you built that inner strength inside you for other victims.
Okay. Yeah. I just listening. I told Mckenna, I said, this is a resource that I wish I had known about. Just learning that these resources are available to people because I'm frontline, right? I'm frontline, whether inpatient or partial hospitalization, or I'm doing one-on-one therapy. I still rely on resources such as yours because even after the therapy is done with us, we're still needing people to continue that work. So I think, and I'm sure for Mckenna, I mean, we as social workers, as therapists, licensed professional counselors, I think the number one thing for us in order to help people to get through after trauma is we just have to make sure that we're just a sounding board, that we're not immersing ourselves into the person's trauma. That makes sense. Yeah. More than anything. For myself, I think one of the ways that I've built myself up is just knowing that I can't allow myself to be, what we call vicarious trauma. I can become traumatized by someone else's trauma. Yes. Yeah. I'm just there to listen. I'm just there to let the person, help them walk through the process of healing. Yeah. But I don't have to feel it for them. If that makes sense.
Now, do you work with people of all different ages? Or?
Yes.
Okay, so how is it different for you working, I'll call it with young people versus adults?
So with children, children are pretty resilient. I don't know if you've seen this, Mckenna, but children, believe it or not, I think there's a certain level of processing that they have. In other words, a trauma happens to them and they don't have enough background to draw from, right? They don't have enough life experience to draw from. So it's pretty much them dealing with the emotions and the response to it. A lot of times they don't even know the questions to ask about why this happened to me. Does that make sense? And adults have had, time to grow and process and have experiences where now it's, did this happen to me because, there's something wrong with me? Did I do something wrong?
Do you get a lot of kids with self-guilt saying it was my fault?
They will blame themselves, but generally that comes from the person that's perpetrated them. A lot of times they'll put it on them. I'll hurt you if you tell. And now it's like, okay, they bear the burden of, not telling.
Right.
But I noticed that with adults, now Mckenna, you may back this up, but with adults, there's just more life experience and processing and ego development to draw from, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Yeah.
It does. And, I'm not a woman, so I don't know what the feelings are of being violated in that way. But
don't forget our boys, though.
Don't
boys
forget
too.
Our
boys.
And, no.
Please
boys
don't
too.
forget our boys.
No, not at all, not at all. But what I want, I've been reading up on, I as law enforcement, I've dealt with rapes.
Yeah.
The word date rape. Okay, I'm not a big fan of it because to me it kind of minimizes the act in sort of way when it's like, she was just date raped. No, she was raped. I don't, just because it was done on a college campus, just because you were past sexual partners, just because you had a relationship or you knew somebody, or it's rape. Date rape seems to me that we're trying to soften the blow of the violent act that occurred. Am I correct on that?
I think that we don't have the correct verbiage for that, because I think what a lot of people try to encompass when they use the term date rape is that it's not a stranger rape. I think a lot of times when we say just rape, people get the impression that it was like a stranger that pulled you out in a parking lot and, you had never seen this person before. It was completely willy-nilly. They saw the first vulnerable person in a miniskirt and they grabbed him. And that's most people's impression of rape. We use date rape, the way that we use that term as far as education goes, is to qualify anything where there was a perceived intimacy that might happen. So that could be on a first date, but it could also be in a relationship. It could be intimate partner rape. It could be somebody that you're married to. We do call that marital rape at that point. But, your fiance, somebody that you're cohabiting with. All of those things kind of fall into that category. I don't think that we have, because we're not having, this is a fairly new conversation that we're having so openly, that we don't have the correct language to properly describe an acquaintance rape, what it's like when it's somebody that you know, because there's a completely different set of power and control imbalances that come into that than when it is a stranger rape like we normally think about.
Well, okay. What did they consider when you were assaulted? What did they consider yours?
That was a strange rape because I did not know that person.
Okay.
I had a conversation with them that day. So there was no prior contact. I wasn't like a friend of a friend or anything like that. So that was cut and dry. And the majority of the time that you see people that, number one, make reports and then also are like me that are willing to get up and share their story are people that were victims of stranger rape, because it's a lot easier to go to the police and say, I've never met this person before. It's not going to affect my life in any way other than making me feel safer if he's behind bars. But if it is your roommate's best friend, there's all other types of tension that are going to come out of that. If it is your stepfather, there's a whole lot of issues that are going to come out of that. And so those cases aren't reported, and those are not the people that are getting up and saying, this happened to me.
So, okay, explain to me this way. Because, like, when I was in law enforcement, date rape is kind of new, pretty much. So I really didn't deal with it that much. But when you think about this, you were drugged, right? Okay, you were drugged. So I'm in college, right?
Yeah.
The girl in the dorm next to me, I slip drugs to, and I rape her. Is that a date rape? Will they classify that as date rape? I knew the girl. We're at a party. We were talking, and I slipped drugs to her. And is it considered a date rape, or is it considered a rape? That
would be more of an acquaintance rape, is what we would classify that as, because it's somebody that you know, but not somebody that you already have like an intimacy with. You know what I'm saying?
What I'm getting at, and I get all this terminology and all this verbiage, it's still rape.
Yes.
In my book.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. But per penal law, right? See, to me, when you go onto a stand and you look in front of a jury and you turn around, it's acquaintance rape, it was date rape. There are jurors that will go, oh, they had an intimate thing. Right. So you're going to lower their emotional verdict.
Yeah.
Sort of say.
Yeah.
To say, well, maybe they were dating and it got out of hand, and let's not charge him with the rape that he committed. Let's charge him with sexual assault, which is a much lesser charge, and it's a much lesser jail term. To me, I don't agree with that. I agree when we put this verbiage in front of, a rape, we are misleading jurors and putting people in a predicament to use their mind, because you have to be beyond a reasonable doubt to get a conviction. So, well, maybe, and as soon as they say that, you've lost that beyond a reasonable doubt. Right. That's like saying, lowering the murder charge or lowering the domestic violence charge. Well, they were husband and wife, domestic violence. No, it's an assault.
Right.
It's an assault. So we put these words in front of things that really victimize the victim twice.
Yeah.
Agreed?
Yeah, I agree with that. I will say, in the state of Texas, we prosecute marital rape the same way that we prosecute any other types of rape. A lot of that burden falls on the prosecutor for properly explaining. I think that there's the majority of jurors right now will probably think, well, oh, they were dating. It's just part of the relationship.
Right.
Sometimes you don't want to have sex, but you have to.
Right.
A lot of people are in that way of thinking. And so that's partially the prosecutor's job to change their minds there, but it's also our job in the community. My job as a community educator, every time I go and talk to a group of people, I realize that I'm talking to a group of jurors. And I need to get them to understand it doesn't matter whether you had a relationship with this person, whether you were having sex with them 6 hours ago and now you've decided you don't want to, you've taken a break, you don't want to anymore, and you're done with them. They can't just turn around and say, well, we did it a little while ago, why don't you want to now? They can't force themselves on you. That's still rape.
Right.
And so it's
No is no.
No is no.
No
Yeah,
is no.
Absolutely. And so, yeah, I mean, that's a cultural responsibility that we all have in shifting the way that we view those things.
And the cultural responsibility, I mean, thank you to what you're doing is getting bigger, because the programs that you're bringing to the public, and let's talk a little bit about the most recent program that you had scheduled that is most likely going to be online now.
Yes.
Is dealing with the service industry, specifically those that work in bars, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started this program called Bartenders Not Bystanders. And we were going to have a program yesterday, and we were supposed to have a program next Tuesday. But unfortunately, we are rescheduling those. I am thinking about switching it to webinar format, and if we do, I'll make sure that we post it through y'all's channels. But so I created this program because I actually have a background in the bar industry. That's actually what I had done leading up to this. And I think a lot of times, number one, in the service industry, you have this idea of like, it's not your responsibility. And then the other thing is that the people that do realize that something is off and something is wrong usually don't step in because maybe they don't feel equipped. A lot of times people feel like, maybe other people in that establishment aren't going to respect their decision. There could be managers that are like, well, that's going to ruin our business, or he's not really causing any trouble. We don't want to make a scene. We don't want to kick somebody out. And so it's going in and shifting, number one, our perspective and addressing the way that we view alcohol and sexual assaults, because a lot of times we have this idea that if a woman gets intoxicated, if she made the choice to get intoxicated, she has given up control. And at that point, whatever happens after that is, she made the choice to get that drunk. So whatever happens is kind of ultimately her responsibility for getting drunk in the first place.
You're intoxicated, you can't give legal consent.
Yes. A lot of people don't understand that. They really don't, because they're like, well, you consented to getting drunk. You put yourself in this situation. That's something called male sexual access rights that were studied in the 80s, and a lot of those pillars of male sexual access rights still hold true today, and that's one of them. And then it's also changing the idea that, that you do have a responsibility for your patrons and that it is on you. I think a lot of people are like, well, they're adults, they make their own choices, or this is just what people do when they're drunk, or things like that. And it's shifting that view so that we're not normalizing those behaviors and making sure that those sober individuals that should be sober if they're behind the bar, and hopefully they are, are, being responsible for the people that they're supposed to be responsible for.
So right now, it's still there. The bartenders are responsible to not overserve the patrons, because you would just mention, she chose to come in here and get drunk.
Right.
So we've got that overservice issue that bars and establishments can be legally held liable. I think this is great because I'll speak for myself as a woman. I would love to be in an establishment where I know that the establishment's going to have my back and is looking out for patrons, not just women, but guys too.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, I think that's awesome.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think that once people start to accept that responsibility and then are also empowered with the right tools and know what to look for, know what the signs are, not have a stereotypical view of what it is, understanding that sometimes people can come in together and it can still end in date rape.
Right.
And just being more aware. And you're right, they do have the responsibility to make sure that they're not over-serving. But then there's another law that a lot of people aren't as familiar with, which is the dram shop law. And that is that if someone is, intoxicated in your establishment and they go on to injure someone else, then you're liable for that injury. And so a lot of times we use that with DUIs and things of that nature, but it also counts with sexual assault if the perpetrator was intoxicated or the victim was intoxicated if the victim drank there. And so that's a responsibility and a liability that's on the bars and restaurants that I think a lot of people aren't super aware of.
Yeah.
LT, weigh in.
So as I've gotten older, and I have a 14-year background in the Navy, right? 14 years in the Navy.
Which is a whole nother aspect.
It's a whole
the
no,
issue.
but here's where I've come to, and especially as a social worker, I think that, and this is just to bring balance to the conversation. So I do think that we, as men and women, I think that we do have to begin to balance out that there is a part of our responsibility for situational awareness, right? And the choices that we make. I'm gonna give you a personal example. And when I was in the Navy, a family will be hearing this for the first time, but and I actually have never told this story like this, but I went to a barracks room of a friend, Air Force friend, no, intimate relations, anything like that, just a friend. And there was a group of males there, and I drank beer and whatever, I think it was rum punch or something like that, and I willfully drank the beer, drank the rum punch, no situational awareness, not even paying attention to who was there, and drank and passed out. I have no clue of from the time that I drank it to the time, and I willfully chose to drink. Now, thankfully, my friend, I don't know what happened between the time I passed out, but I kind of assessed and woke up, and I had been laid on the bed, clothes on, no pain, nothing. Okay, so I go back to that time and that moment of choices that I made that led up to that. It was, hey, we're having a barracks party, come on down, cool. Hey, we got beer. Hey, we got rum punch. Situational awareness on me in certain choices up to that point. Now, anything that happened thereafter, no. Am I responsible for it? No. You have a responsibility to leave my body alone.
Right.
But I think we do have to balance out the conversation with young men and women where, or older men and women where it is, yes, we do want establishments to have a responsibility. We want people to have a responsibility not to touch you. In addition to that, we also have to have a personal responsibility to be aware of the potential when we drink.
Well, I agree.
Does that make sense?
It
has to happen in addition to, not just, no, we can't have this conversation.
Right.
But this is something that, again, doing this work as a social worker, and something I've had to weigh from that situation.
But it makes
Does
perfect
that make
sense.
sense?
It makes
Yeah.
perfect sense, but I'm always going to throw in a but.
In addition to,
no, I'm always going to throw in a but because, since situational awareness can become blurred very quickly without being aware that you're becoming unaware of your situational awareness.
And
right?
Yes.
So, let's think about this. I haven't eaten today, so those 2 glasses of wine, right? Those 2 glasses of wine that didn't hurt me the last time I was here, but now they hit me differently because our body's metabolism works different, and now we got drunk. And we weren't planning on getting drunk, but we had a couple of drinks. We weren't planning on become unaware, but we accidentally crossed that boundary. Or we get somebody that put something in our drink and we cross that boundary. So, it is a fine line.
It's such a fine line, and it's an individual transaction, right? Like each engagement is such an individual, unique transaction, even though they share some of the same. A person who decides to take advantage of that moment, you said it, there's different power structures that are happening,
Right.
which each transaction, which makes it so difficult
right.
to navigate.
And that's why I feel your course, Mckenna, that you're coming up with, putting the responsibility on the bar industry who's serving that alcohol. Sam, you said, the bartender is responsible if he gets somebody drunk. If they drive, they have a car accident. They locked up that bartender for 2 Super Bowls ago that got a guy drunk. He was spinning a knife on the bar during Super Bowl. He came in. He told the bartender, "I'm going to kill my whole family." She did nothing about it. He left the bar and he killed his whole family, his ex-wife's family, right here in Dallas. Right. So she was held accountable for that, for not reporting it. So as you have to take the TBAC law, the certificate, I would like to see something like this. Yeah. And to hold them more accountable for their actions instead of just putting their blinders on and walking away and serving drinks.
Yeah. And that's totally the hope. We were planning on having TAVC, their education department, join us for one of these bartenders, not bystanders, actually for next week. But obviously we can't do that. But that is the goal with this program, is that it eventually will be adopted by TAVC and that will be a mandate course that people are taking. It's something that's in alignment with the CDC. Essentially, they consider sexual assault and abuse an epidemic because it's so widespread. And so one of their pillars of the way that we handle this as an epidemic is bystander intervention. And there's like a university program called Green Dot, and Green Dot is specifically for college students to raise bystander intervention standards. If you see something happening that's a red dot behavior, you intervene, it becomes a green dot behavior. And so that's the university version. And so I wanted to make something that was, specifically for that intervention standpoint for the service industry and geared towards the environment that they're in specifically. I will say too, one just quick point about what we were talking about that situational awareness. And one thing that actually I was thinking about today is how important it is to be aware of repeat victimization. And what we see is that young women who are raped before the age of 18 or experience sexual abuse before the age of 18, 1 in 3 of those victims will experience rape again as an adult. We see there's something called the adverse childhood experiences. Have y'all heard of that?
ACE. That I have not.
Yes. Okay, so ACE, the adverse childhood experiences, is essentially a score that children are given on adverse childhood experiences they have. So it can range from anything like parents getting divorced to abuse, neglect. One of the questions is like, did you have a medical injury that wasn't treated in the hospital? Did you feel like you weren't going to have food? Did you, questions like that. And then they also have alternately a resilience score. And even if you rank really high on the ACE test, if you rank also really high on the resilience score, questions like, is there someone in your life that you trust? Did you have somebody that was interested in your schooling? Did you have somebody that checked in about your day? Things like that raises your resilience. But what we see is that those kids that have really high ACEs that score very low on their resilience, and adulthood experience higher rates of chronic illness, alcoholism, drug use, teen pregnancy, both perpetration and victimization of domestic violence, depending on mostly gender in that situation. And so that's something to bear in mind. So actually, to this point, I read an article this morning about a young man in Detroit who was 19 years old and got picked up by 3 individuals at a convenience store and ended up going to a sex party with them, engaged in consensual activity amongst all the people. And then he left, and the defense was that he was ashamed of his sexuality because it was with other men and didn't want to get found out. And so he went and shot the people that were at the party, turned around and shot them. And so when I read this story, honestly, my initial thought was, how terrible for that person that he felt like he was so ashamed of what he had just done, and he had so much internal conflict that he went and did that he went and felt like the only resort to this situation was to go and kill somebody, to kill 3 people. To kill 3 people over it. And then I instantly caught myself, because this is the same mentality that we have with rapists a lot of time, is like, well, we feel bad for them, or how did he get in this situation, or he didn't know any better. And then I think at the same time, we want to validate their experience. We want to feel sorry for them. We want to get to the origin of their trauma. What made them be this way? The same thing happens to our victims, though. Like, if we were to sit here and analyze, why did our victim get in this situation where they were so vulnerable? If you're to trace that back, a lot of times that is linked to early childhood trauma. that results in these risk-taking behaviors if it's not properly treated.
Yeah, and the ACEs is actually used for PTS
Oh, okay.
questionnaires to see. They're also looking into the impact on police officers and that are suffering from post-traumatic stress, and whether they had ACEs in their background, because it goes to treatment protocol.
Right.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah.
the different treatment
Makes sense.
protocols,
Makes sense.
you know, it's not
It's still a
just
trauma.
one
It's a
and done.
mind trauma. It's a
Yeah,
head trauma. It's you know,
exactly.
it's a trauma.
So those that have experienced a trauma early in life, not that they're necessarily going to be worse as an adult, but the way that it's treated, whatever your modality of therapy that you choose, you can't neglect, kind of call it the underlying something that may have set them up to react or respond or stay
Right.
angry and do
So-
things like that. There's
so-
a lot of a lot of research out there, and you touched on something, the shame of this Detroit. In anything dealing with trauma, you link it back to shame and people not wanting to get help. How, for both of you guys, for people listening, because it's not just the people listening that might have gone through this, but they know somebody. How do you break through that wall of shame, that wall of stigma, that they might be hesitant to reach out and get help?
I'm I think Mckenna really hit on, you realize in your life that things weren't working, that after a while the trauma brain leads to outcomes and choices and decisions that eventually the person is going to look at and say, my life isn't working. That which has happened to me isn't working anymore. And so I think a lot of times what happens with a lot of our survivors is life will find you, right? You find yourself needing intervention. One of the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, one of their statistics is that for every 1,000 rapes, only 384 are reported to police.
It's a third.
57 result in an arrest. 1,000. 11 are referred for prosecution of the 57, right? And only 6 result in incarceration.
Well, on a law enforcement, and what happens is after a rape, if a rape kit is not done,
Yes.
we lose so much.
Harder.
We lose so much.
Yes. The time.
DNA.
We
lose
the evidence.
You lose so much. And now, if you think about all the rape kits that have been sitting on the shelves in throughout the country, that have not been tested, that is a rape kit is the prosecution's golden ball to say you are guilty.
For sure.
And
on that note, so I say that to say, for all of the ones that aren't reported, what I say to people in as far as the stigma, life is going to find you. The trauma is going to catch up to you.
Yes.
The trauma will find you. And the moment that trauma comes, the moment that the issue starts showing up where you need intervention, it's at that point you have to make the decision, I need help. This isn't working. The justice for me as a social worker in helping someone who's been raped, justice is in your healing. Because whether that person, you see six prosecutions or 6 incarcerations for every 1,000, then the likelihood of your perpetrator getting caught or facing time, there's not going to be justice on that avenue. So I say to you, your justice is in seeking your healing.
Which is exactly what you did, Mckenna,
Yeah.
because you had the prosecution
Completely fall through.
Right. Your assailants were never prosecuted or brought to justice.
Yeah. And I would say, firstly, to answer your question, one thing that when I talk to victims, one thing that I say is you can accept that you are a victim of something without always living in victim mentality. For me, it took almost an entire year before I could say the word rape out loud. I couldn't say I was raped. I would get a lump in my throat. I would get anxious. It was, for me, wrapping my mind around that concept, acknowledging that this was something that actually happened to me. It's the worst thing that you could imagine happening to anybody, the worst violation, and that happened to me. And that was so difficult for me to wrap my mind around, and it was almost like paralyzing to think of that. It was so overwhelming. But then I got to the point where I realized, like, well, I was a victim of rape, right? I am not a rape victim, which sounds like the same thing, but I was a victim of rape. This doesn't define me. This is something that happened to me one day in my life. For some people, it happens to them multiple times, which is terrible. But this is something that happened to me one day in my life, and then I got to make all the choices after that. And for for 8 months to a year, I wasn't making my own choices after that because I was living in that anxiety. I was living in that fear, and I was so scared.
You were letting it control you.
I was letting it control me, and I was so scared of acknowledging what happened that if you can name it, you can tame it. I was so scared of acknowledging.
Boom, drop the mic.
I like that.
Mike, you can name
I
it.
can't take credit for that. But yes, if you can name it, you can tame it. And so when I finally was like, okay, this is something that happened to me, but I get to make all the choices after this. That's when I stepped into this purpose, and it changed my entire life. I mean, this is all I do, and I feel so much joy out of it, and so much purpose and self-worth, and I got all of that back. And to her point about that is your justice, that is my justice.
Right.
Every time that I turn around and I walk in front of a room of people, I'll tell you what, I live in Euless, and I work primarily in Dallas, and I take 183. And every time I drive down that road, I drive past the apartment that I was raped in and the convenience store that I found myself at when I woke up from the drugs. Every single time. And the first couple times that I had to make that commute, it was having no control over that situation. And I just got back from speaking to 200 people about why they can't do this to others and why their rights matter. And I was like, this is the biggest FU I could ever say to those guys. Like, what more can you do? You
That's
know
right.
What I mean?
Yep.
It's so much. I mean,
You took the control back.
Right, exactly.
You took the control back from them.
Yeah, and that's to her point. That's so essential for victims too, is realizing that your healing is your justice and taking control of your life, because they don't have control of you forever unless you let them, unless you choose to stay in that trauma.
And a lot of people do that.
Mm-hmm. And that's why I say you can accept that you were a victim without falling into victim mentality.
Yeah.
I think people are scared of that. I think people are scared that if they say, number one, that they're a victim, that other people will perceive them that way, but also that you'll fall into this trap of like, oh, well, my life turned out this way because of this, or you're making an excuse for yourself.
Yeah.
And it's not an excuse. It's an acknowledgement of a very serious trauma that you went through and something that you've overcome. It's not an excuse, but it does. It's an origin for a lot of things that people experience after that. You know what I mean? But if you choose to make the right moves after that point, then it's not an excuse at all. It's the reason for why you do the things that you do now.
Right.
And can I throw this, and I want to make sure, because it's so difficult to say that. Like I said, I try to be that balancing force. I just want to make sure I clarify. I am saying that when we take situational awareness, like a situation like mine, again, you are never responsible for your own rape, ever.
Right.
I also would add to people, to Sam's point, you don't have to explain yourself in your situation. In other words, if you were raped, you don't have to prove, unless it goes to a prosecution, you don't need to prove to anybody what the circumstances were. If it was your husband, your boyfriend, a stranger, a date, I don't care. If you were violated, you were violated. That's your truth. And when you heal it, it's your healing. So you don't owe anyone an explanation or have to prove yourself to be, why this happened or why it shouldn't have happened.
Right.
In that conversation.
And a defense attorney, and that's why I used to hate going to court, because a defense attorney will always put the blame on the victim.
Yes.
What were you wearing? How many times have you had sex? They'll take they will use every aspect and every ounce of misjudgment that you've made since you were in elementary school.
Yes.
Where you hung upside down on the monkey bars in second grade and your dress went up, and they'll use that as, well, that that started back then. So you must have had a bad childhood, and you must have not been hugged enough. And they switch the blame on, which gets me furious.
And on that point, the law just changed in September. A lot of people, so many awesome things happen in the legislative session.
Legislations?
The legislative session.
Say that.
Got real text in there. Back in September. But one of the things that happened was that that's called character evidence, which I'm sure y'all know. But now, if the defense attorney wants to have any type of character evidence against the victim, they actually have to, number one, before they even ask the victim questions, present that to the judge, and the judge has to deem if those are worthy of even being asked. And then if they do, they ask the questions to the victim privately in a separate room. The questions get recorded. Question and answers get recorded. It gets sent back to the judge. The judge determines if anything in that interview was even worth being considered as evidence.
Oh, wow.
And
That's
then
good.
it gets presented to the jury.
Wow.
So none of that questioning has to happen in front of the jurors anymore.
That's
no
awesome.
more victimizing.
No,
Yeah.
right. That's awesome. That's great that they passed that.
Yeah.
All right, before we run out of time,
Oh, wow.
I know it's
So
just,
far, so
It
fast.
does. It's like
before we run out of time, the bartenders and bystanders, right? Give us a little sneak peek on what the workshop is all about. How is a bartender or somebody in the service industry going to stop a person from being victimized?
So we break it down into essentially 3 parts. Number one, you're being aware of your environmental factors. This is obviously completely dependent from bar to bar, but we address the environmental factors in each situation, like what type of signaling are you sending in your bar? For instance, I was at a bar recently here in Arlington that had a little flyer for an event that they had, and it was a little comic strip about a woman who she was very clearly in the picture not interested in the man. She had her back turned. And then the caption was, "Beer always makes you more attractive." And so the guy, he orders her a beer. She drinks the beer down. And then you see the last picture on the comic is like an empty beer glass, and they're making out behind it. But very clearly in the beginning, she wasn't interested. And so I was like, well, what kind of
Message.
signaling are we doing?
Right.
Yeah.
Right here
Yeah.
at your bar where somebody places an order.
Right.
And so that's something that, and a lot of people honestly don't think about it. Like they truly.
But it goes
just
into your
don't
mind.
think.
It's definitely a subliminal
Subliminal.
message.
Yeah.
It's a subliminal message for any guy out there who's trying to pick up or hook up
What is it?
at a
Beer
bar.
goggles, right?
Beer goggles, right?
goggles.
Trying to hook
Exactly.
up at a
Yeah.
bar.
I think
You know-
I dated myself.
You know, you think you're going to walk into that bar, and now a guy sees that, a guy who's on the prowl, who's going to look to hook up. Subliminally, he thinks that says, that's the green light.
Yeah. And
Order her a
we're
beer.
cool with you doing this. We
Or-
recommend that you do this. So that's your environmental factors. And then to go against that and show that you have support, one thing that I recommend and have pre-printed whenever I go into the places is you can put a sign in your restroom that says sexual harassment isn't okay here. One thing that we recommend is giving a specific name of a person behind the bar. So some places are little dive bars. You only have 2 people behind the bar. It's homey most of the time. You know the people that are coming in and out. But with larger establishments, what I recommend is addressing the strengths and weaknesses of people that are on your staff. And anytime that you're working on your schedule, you have somebody that is designated as the team lead if something is to escalate. Because normally you need somebody that's a little bit more assertive, more confident. Obviously somebody that's done the
Responsible.
training,
Right.
more responsible,
Right.
somebody that's not going to drink on shift because that happens sometimes.
Well,
And so, equipping that person and then making sure that the staff is aware of what the plan is if you see it. So that's like your environmental factors. And then, so we can ask.
I was going to, I don't want to cut you off because but I want to, going bartenders and bystanders, we're talking about bystanders now, but it just clicked in my head, bartenders
No.
and waitresses. We're talking about staff, the rape that goes on within staff. I mean, that now you're talking another level of it when you're trying to put all these factors together. Who is the mouse watching this cheese?
It's complicated.
So we do a survey, pre and post survey, and one of the questions on there is actually like, do you feel like this policy would be respected in your environment? But then also because sexual harassment is so high in the service industry, we talk about that too. Like, is there any issue with this amongst your staff? Do you feel like you have adequate response? Like, do you feel like managers take this adequately seriously? Are they, do you have policies in effect? Do you feel like if we create policies that they will be followed? Things like that. And we do follow up. Follow up.
The one thing that I don't like is most bar establishments do not have an HR.
Oh, no.
Right.
You know,
No.
they
There
don't.
you go.
They don't.
Right.
They don't.
There's no-
Most.
Unless it's like a big
Right, that
conglomerate,
they corporate bar.
Right.
But most of these bars, most of these industries do not have an HR where a girl can feel or a guy could feel comfortable going and reporting this. Because who are you going to report this? If your manager or the owner of the bar is the one that's causing this, where's your justice? You have nowhere to turn. You
Right.
have zero place to turn.
Right.
And nowadays with a single mom or a single dad or I can't lose this job.
Yeah.
Right.
You're stuck in that predicament.
Yeah.
No way out.
Well, I think it's great that this education is coming forward, and I hope that the establishments take advantage of it. Is there any kind of certificate that will go in the window to be, they have all the TABC has requirements, but that will go in the window of the establishment?
Yes. So
Okay,
number
that's
one, we're
awesome.
doing.
like a safe bar type.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
Safe
we
Bar,
actually
yeah.
have Safe Bar's logo. Have it on a decal that goes in the window. The requirement for that is that all of the staff has to be trained. So anybody, 100%, anybody that takes this training individually, voluntarily, gets a certification regardless. But for the entire establishment to be certified, we have to,
Well, that
to
makes
get
sense.
approved. Yeah. So I mean, we're talking, even your bar backs, the people that don't actually serve drinks, they're still interacting, and those are sometimes the best people that you can get involved with actually watching the behavior on the floor. But yeah, we require everyone to do that, and then we do have that, and also because we work so closely with the different universities, we have a list that we're sending to each of the universities of those certified safe bars, so that they can recommend it and pass it on to their students. And we're incorporating this as we get into the freshmen coming in the fall. We'll be making sure that that's part of the orientation, letting them know, like, here are the places around here that you can feel safe and comfortable.
Excellent.
That's awesome.
LT, can I get some closing statements real quick because we're out of time.
We're out of time. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. Thank you for what you do.
Please listen to LaTonya Davison every Sunday now, right?
Sunday, 5 to 7 p.m.
5 to 7.
Studio B.
Studio
A.
B. It's Studio A.
Yes.
Mental
Yes.
Speak.
Mental
and,
Speak.
And what is that you're doing? Mental Speak and
Music Speak.
And Music Speak.
Yes.
Which is a whole new twist. Check her out. It's wonderful. Very talented. Very informative. Great show. I'm glad thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having
McKenna,
me.
always a pleasure. We will continue these conversations over the next couple of months, and we will support you in this workshop. Actually, I would love to attend one of the workshops just to see.
Absolutely.
Sam, any closing?
Hey, if you can name it, you can tame it.
I'm still in that.
I like it.
I
like
stole
it.
that from someone. I don't know who it was.
Knowledge.
I can't take the
It's
credit.
Good stuff.
Wow.
Good stuff. Great show.
Yes. Well, once again, this is the Mad Radio Show. We're here on FBRN.US every Wednesday from 6 to 7. It's me and Sam. We talk about our issues like this, which are, they hit home a lot to a lot of people. And community.
Yeah. Community awareness.
Community awareness and making it, and McKenna's making a difference. If you have a organization or a foundation that would like to promote something like this that's going to help save lives and prevent other victims, please give us a shout. Hit us up on our Facebook page. We are always dedicated to our first responders and their mental health. So once again, I will listen. I will listen. Sam will listen. McKenna will listen.
absolutely.
LaTonya will listen. If you are having mental stress through this COVID-19 issue, please reach out to us. We will get back to you. There is no reason to mental stress. We are going to get through this together. And until next week, love everybody. Peace out.
Hi, this is Howard Scott from The Howard Scott Show, coming to you from beautiful Arlington, Texas on Fishbowl Radio. You can catch me every Wednesday